And we're back. Hungover and very tired. But we're gonna do the hardcore. Well, we're gonna attempt to do the hardcore challenge. Well, cool. Okay, this is fine. And let's see. Why is it showing offline? I went out last night. It was a fun night, but as you can see, it's I'm still recovering, so I'm not going to be talking a lot. I'm just going to listen to some Magnus archives. What is this? Stream info, stream manager. Their app is so unreliable. Okay, there we go. Right. Let's see how it sounds actually.
Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives.
Yeah, sounds good. The microphones.
Episode 24. Strange Music.
The microphone is really low. I don't know why. Okay, now it should be better. Okay, here we go.
Statement of Leanne Denikin regarding an antique calliope organ she possessed briefly in August 2004. Original statement given January 17th, 2005. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Let me be clear. I'm not scared of clowns. I don't find them funny either, just a bit baffling, really. I've never understood why people would find grown men in stupid makeup and wigs funny or scary. It's the same with dolls. People talk about their cold, dead eyes, but they don't seem to have any problem with statues. I suppose now I've got good reason to be scared of both. I just want you to understand I wasn't seeing things out of fear. This happened. It didn't come as a surprise when my grandfather died last August. I'd been living with him for almost 2 years at his home in Bootle, looking after him through his illness. My mother was having her own difficulties at the time, and my good-for-nothing father wanted nothing to do with any of it, so looking after my grandpa came down to me. It wasn't so bad, really. My grandpa was a strange man at times. He'd been a carny for most of his life, working with traveling circuses and freak shows all over Europe, and was something of a recluse in his later years. He could also swear a blue streak a mile wide. Get him behind the keys of a piano, though, and I don't know anyone who could play as beautifully as he could. Like I say, it wasn't a surprise when he finally died, but I still found it difficult. As you may have guessed, I don't have a great relationship with my parents, and have always had some problems making friends, so when he went, it hit me hard. I didn't go out that week, or the next. I saw Joshua, my partner, I
Weird.
suppose you'd have called him. But
The
aside from that, I
question
didn't see anyone
disappear.
between Grandpa's death and the funeral. It was just me, Josh, and my mother. Grandpa had never been a churchgoer, but my mother had a lot of faith, so paid for a Methodist funeral, such as it was. It was a hot, muggy day, and I remember wondering whether the stinging in my eyes was from the tears or the sweat. As it turned out, Grandpa had left me his house. It didn't really sink in for a while. The house had been the most home I'd had for so long that I always felt it was mine in some ways. Going through my grandpa's old papers and possessions was harder than I had expected. It was only reading some of his old letters that I discovered his birth name was Nikolai. He'd always just gone by Nick. Eventually, I sorted through everything. I had a small box of memories I wanted to keep, but I just wasn't up to throwing the rest away yet. I decided to store them in the loft. I knew the house had one, although I had never been inside. It had always been locked. It wasn't a mystery or anything, just that my grandpa hadn't needed to get anything from up there while I was living with him. At least I thought so. It was only then I realized I had never been inside it. More annoyingly, I quickly discovered that none of the keys I'd been given for the place were for the padlock. No luck searching for it around the rest of the house either. In the end, I had to cut the lock off with a pair of bolt cutters I found in the garage. There was also a ladder in the garage, so getting up through the small square hole wasn't a problem. I realized then that I didn't have a torch. It was very dark. Despite it being the middle of summer, the loft was cool, almost cold. I considered heading back down to get a torch and a jacket, but as I reached out my hand, it brushed against something which felt like a pull cord. I gave it a tug, and a small, weak bulb came to life, and I saw what was inside. When I had first remembered about the loft, I'd been annoyed. I thought there'd be so much more stuff up there, days more sorting to go through. But when I turned on the light, I saw that it was almost completely empty. The only things there were an old steamer trunk, a small stool, and a bright red calliope organ. The ceiling was higher than I expected as well. I could stand at my full height without stooping. I walked slowly towards the old steam organ. It was bright red and in excellent condition except for a thick layer of dust. There was a small brass plaque simply reading, "The Calliophone." The brass pipes that stuck out from the top still shone faintly under the dust, and I noticed that there was writing carved onto the cover of the keyboard. It read, "Be still, for there is strange music." I went to the steamer trunk next, and was surprised to find it unlocked. Opening it released a cloud of dust, and I coughed a few times before I got the heavy lid up. Inside were dolls, lots of them. They looked old, with ragged, limp cloth bodies topped with oversized round heads and large, painted eyes that stared up from their shadowed trunk. The hair on each was intricate and woolen, and while they certainly weren't the sort of dolls a ventriloquist would use, the heads had similar mouths, wooden blocks that would have opened and closed to simulate speech. At least, they should have had. Almost all of them had had their jaw block roughly torn off, leaving nothing but jagged splinters between their cheeks. There were 23 dolls I counted in total, and only one of them still had its jaw intact. It was the oldest looking by far, and was a small clown doll. Its threadbare body was white and purple polka dot, with 3 pom-poms down the front, and a ruff just below the head. It had no woolen hair left, but instead there was a tall, pointed white cap on top. Its face was painted a pure white, and its eyes were shut, with black lines drawn across them. The only color was a splash of red across the hinged jaw. A smile. Like I said, I'm not scared of clowns and I'm not scared of dolls. The thing was ugly, though. I was kind of relieved, actually, to have found some of my grandpa's old things that I would have no problem throwing away. Or maybe selling. They were definitely antiques, so they might have been worth something. In any case, I put the nasty-looking clown doll back in the box and closed the lid. I definitely closed the lid. I went back over to the calliope.
I thought it was pronounced Calliope.
Sasha, you're back early. I thought you were trying to get hold of those police reports for the Harold Sylvana case.
Tried and succeeded. They were actually quite helpful.
Oh. Well, good work.
So, do we know if it's pronounced Calliope or Calliope?
I have also heard it said as Calliope.
Seriously? By who?
Americans.
Ah.
As far as I can tell, there isn't a correct pronunciation, but they were originally named after the Greek muse Calliope, so...
Are people going to understand that it's from Greek mythology?
If they are working for the Magnus Institute, then I would hope so.
I've just heard it more often as Calliope.
Statement resumes. I went back over to the calliope. There was no lock on the lid, or any switch that I could see on the outside. I opened it, and the keys inside shone as though they had just been polished. Now, at the time, I didn't know how a calliope worked. I just thought it was like a weird pipe piano. I didn't know that there needed to be a blower working for the thing to play, and even if I had, I wouldn't have known where to find one or how to use it. By rights, when I sat in front of it and pressed the first key down, nothing should have happened. The 4 tall rows of brass whistles should have remained silent. Instead, there came a loud, howling tone from one of the pipes, and I almost fell off my seat in surprise. I remember once hearing that the sound of a steam organ could be heard from over a mile away, and when that shrill whistle sounded, I could believe it. I started to play a tune. My grandpa had had a piano once. It had broken years before, and he'd never had the money to replace it, but he had taught me the basics. There was one tune that, when I was a child, I always insisted he play to me. He never told me its name, if it even had one. I always used to just call it Faster, Faster, by way of a description. A cheery, upbeat circus melody that started out almost unbearably slow and gathered in tempo, getting faster and faster until my grandpa's fingers were a blur. He always indulged me when I asked him to play it, and now I played it for him. The wailing whistles were almost deafening in that cramped space. I knew I'd probably be hearing from the neighbors about it, but I didn't care. I just played. The tune got faster, more frantic, and I felt something building inside me. It was like final closure for the loss of my grandpa was just out of reach, and if I got faster, if I played with enough speed, I could catch it. But my finger slipped, and the music abruptly became a discordant cacophony. I was never as good as Grandpa Nick. I sat there in silence for a minute. When I turned to leave, though, I saw that the old steamer trunk was open, and the clown doll lay on top of the pile. Even though its painted eyes were still shut, it felt like it was looking at me. Its smile seemed slightly wider than before. I shut the trunk and climbed down the ladder. I didn't really think about the weird things in the loft over the next week or so. I had too much else to do. It was only when Josh was next round and asked me why the small hole into the attic was open that I remembered. I told him I had something cool to show him and got the ladder out. He was suitably impressed by the calliope, but freaked out a bit over the dolls. I didn't realize he was scared of them. He made me shut the steamer trunk almost as soon as he saw them, and kept looking over to make sure it was closed. I decided not to tell him about the first time it had popped open. He asked if I could play anything on the ancient steam organ, and so I sat down and began to play my grandpa's old circus tune. Again, I began to pick up speed, to play faster and faster as the whistles began to shriek. I felt a hand touch mine firmly, abruptly stopping the music. Josh stood there, shaking slightly, his face deathly pale. On impulse, I looked over to the chest of dolls, but the lid was firmly shut. I asked him what was wrong, and he said he didn't know, he just wanted to leave.
8 copper
Now.
away from...
So we did. Climbed back down out of the loft, and I lowered the wooden trapdoor behind us. The next few weeks were unpleasant. I don't want to go into detail. Let's just say I discovered that Josh was just another asshole after all. Our relationship was already going through a rocky patch. It didn't help that in those last weeks he became moody, short-tempered, constantly on edge. When I finally found out that he had... it doesn't matter. We broke up. It left me pretty much destroyed, coming so soon after my grandpa's death. I just tuned everything out again. Eventually, it was tripping over a box that did it. One of the ones I'd put all my grandpa's stuff into and never actually got round to putting in the loft. I decided to just get it over with. I guess I hoped a tidier house would give me more space to think. So for the third time, I got out that ladder and climbed into the loft. It didn't take as long to store all the boxes as I'd thought, and within an hour I was done. I had been so intent on packing away all my memories that I hadn't even looked at the old steamer trunk. As I went to climb down, I glanced over, but I froze. The lid was open again, and the clown doll was on top. It wasn't looking at me this time. Instead, it seemed to be facing a doll I hadn't seen before. This one still had its jaw as well, and I swear, it looked just like Josh. Same tatty brown jacket, same old jeans. Its black woolen hair even did that flicky thing he always spent so long getting right. It was lying against the side of the box, and I swear, it looked like the clown was reaching for it. I slammed the box lid down and got the hell out of there. I bought a padlock the next day. Now, I've brought a copy of the police report I gave, because you have to believe me that I did not play that calliope again. I had nothing to do with what happened to Josh. I came home from the cinema about a week later to find that my house had been broken into. Here, it's all in the report on the burglary I gave to the police. The front door lock was shattered and it swung gently to and fro. At first I ran into my living room, my bedroom, but nothing had been taken. The electronics, my jewelry, it was untouched. I felt my stomach drop as I realized and ran towards the loft. Sure enough, it was open. The padlock torn from its hook. The calliope and the steamer trunk were gone. They questioned my neighbors about it. None of them had seen anything except for Mrs. Harlow next door, who said she noticed 2 people taking out pieces of red sheet metal and brass pipes. She didn't remember any details, just said that they looked legitimate. She thought I was having some things moved. The police never found them. I just need you to believe that, to know I didn't play the thing again. It wasn't my fault what happened to Josh. God knows I hated him enough back then, but I could never have called anything like that upon him. Not like that.
Oh, someone opened the
I don't
chest.
suppose you need me to tell you how they found him. 4 days later, dead in his room. His throat was crushed, and his jaw was torn clean off. The police never found it. I wouldn't have thought of it, really. Wouldn't have put it all together even then. Not if it hadn't been for the fact that in the last days of our relationship, Josh had broken down. He told me that he still heard that calliope music, far off when he was alone. And it had been getting gradually closer. I mean, they say you can hear one from almost a mile away. Statement ends. While I have what I would consider to be some natural reservations about a tale of murderous clown dolls, there are a few things that make me more inclined than usual to believe this statement. Firstly, as Ms. Denikin mentioned, she did provide a copy of the official police report into the burglary, which includes testimony from one Irene Harlow that appears to confirm Ms. Denikin did possess both a steamer trunk and calliope organ, so those at least existed. The death of Joshua Drury is also at least as mysterious as she made it sound. In addition to his jaw being torn clean off his skull, residual evidence indicates that his throat was crushed with some sort of rope, apparently woven out of thick wool. There was no evidence of a struggle or of forced entry, no DNA evidence of anyone in the room aside from himself. No one was ever arrested for the crime. When discussing this case, Tim said it reminded him of some articles he'd read on traveling circuses in Russia and Poland during the early 20th century. On a whim, I hunted down a few of the volumes he mentioned in the Institute's library, and sure enough, on page 43 of Gregory Petrie's Freaks and Followers, Circuses in the 1940s, I found a reproduction of an old black and white photograph. It shows a small group of carnival workers, a contortionist, a fire eater, 2 strongmen, a ringmaster, and an organist sitting behind a calliope. The photograph is labeled as being from 1948 and taken in Minsk, Russia. Only the ringmaster and organist are named: Gregor Orsinov and Nikolai Denikin. The name of the troupe was Tsark Drogrova, the circus of the other. The name rings a bell, but I can't find any other reference to it. Ms. Denikin emigrated to Southeast Asia 2 years ago, so was unavailable for any follow-up, but I'm sure there must be more on this somewhere in the archives, because I know for a fact that sitting in the Magnus Institute's artifact storage is a bright red calliophone steam organ. When I asked Elias, he just told me that the record of its acquisition was probably in the archives somewhere, and no one else knows anything beyond the fact that it was acquired somewhere in 2007. The keyboard cover is firmly locked, and scratched into the surface are the words, "Be still, for there is strange music." End recording.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. Today's episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. It was produced by Alexander J. Newell, Mike LeBeau, and Murray Porter, and directed by Alexander J. Newell. To comment on
How the fuck is he level 7? Why is he even here?
Rusty Quill presents The Magnus Archives. Episode 25, Growing Dark.
Statement of Mark Billum regarding events culminating in his visit to Hither Green Chapel. Original statement given April 19th, 2015. Audio recording by Jonathan Sims, head archivist of the Magnus Institute, London. Statement begins. Let's get one thing straight right now. I don't think I should be here. What happened was really weird, and I'm pretty sure it was illegal, but it can't have been actually supernatural, like ghosts and stuff. That's not real. No offense, I guess. I'm just here because I told Kathy what happened and she insisted that I tell your institute. She's more open to that kind of thing than me. Maybe that's why she chose to live with Natalie. Sorry, I should start at the beginning. Kathy's my girlfriend, Catherine Harper. We've been dating about a year and a half now. She graduated last year, but I'm doing a medical degree, so I'm not leaving London for another couple of years. She managed to get a job as a trainee teacher up in East Ham, so ended up staying as well. I've got to say I'm glad about it. I'm not sure how good I'd be at a long-distance relationship. Anyway, the original plan was to move in together sooner, but stuff didn't match up properly, and this was before she got the job, so she had to move back with her parents for a while. Long story short, I had to get a house share with some other med students, and she came up later, moving in with Natalie Ennis. I don't know where Kathy met her. They've always been friends. But I don't think she was at uni with us. She never talked about it if she was. Kathy grew up in London, so maybe they were friends from school or something. She seemed nice when I met her. Quiet, but nice. She was very serious, though. I don't know if I ever actually heard her laugh. Maybe she just didn't find my jokes funny. Who knows? She was religious, too. I've never had much time for God myself, and Kathy didn't either. That's why I was kind of surprised the first time I visited her new place and found a framed Bible quote on the wall. Can't remember what it was. Something about Jesus and faith. I don't really know Bible stuff. Kathy said it was Natalie's. She didn't mind her putting it up there in the living room. Kathy's nice like that, you know? Just letting people be themselves. Me and Natalie didn't get on. I don't know if you picked up on that. We didn't hate each other or anything like that. We just didn't have anything in common. She didn't really watch TV or movies, and I didn't know anything about crochet, politics, or God, which were pretty much her only interests. Kathy was always trying to get her to come out with us, and she'd just say no, which was fine by me. She always seemed happy enough, though, hooking yarn into whatever she was making at the time, reading some boring book on the political history of the bonnet or something. That changed last October, when Natalie's mum died. I don't know how it happened exactly. Heart failure, I think. It was sudden, I know that much. And it hit her hard. I mean, obviously it did, it was her mum, but I think she lost her faith. The Bible quote wasn't on the wall the next time I went over, and when I asked Kathy about it, she gave me a look like I shouldn't bring it up. I didn't see much of Natalie after that. She was still around. I'd sometimes see her heading into the kitchen to get some food or tea or something. But apart from that, she just stayed in her room. So far, so normal, right? You lose your mum and it messes you up. That month was sad, but it's not what Kathy wanted us to talk to you about. No. It was what happened afterwards. It was after Natalie found her new church. It was Kathy who told me about it. This must have been about 2 months after Natalie's mum died. I must have asked how she was doing, if she was feeling any better. Kathy said that, yeah, she was. Apparently she'd found a new congregation and seemed to be getting some comfort there. She hadn't been crying so much at night, Kathy said, and hadn't been quite as prickly when she tried to talk. I noticed that the Bible quote hadn't gone back up, though. I thought if she was doing better, I'd probably see Natalie around more when I stayed with Kathy, but if anything, she seemed to almost completely disappear. She never seemed to be there when I went over. I'd see her leave in the evening and come home early in the morning just as the sky was starting to get light. She'd go straight into her room, ignoring us completely. When I asked her where she'd been one time, she just told me, church. I asked her a few more questions, but she stared at me in this weird way until I got freaked out and left the room. I joked with Kathy that her flatmate was turning into a vampire, but instead of laughing, she just got defensive and said that Natalie couldn't be a vampire. Then she started listing times she'd seen her in the sunlight before, just kind of trailing off. I think we both realized how messed up it was if she could list the number of times she'd seen Natalie in daylight. Other strange stuff began to happen around the flat as well. The light bulbs kept blowing to begin with. Well, that's not entirely true. It always seemed to be that when we got in after dark, we'd try to turn on the lights and, well, nothing would happen. At first we just threw the old bulbs out and replaced them, but it kept happening. We checked the fuses, the sockets. Kathy even called the landlord to have someone check out the wiring, but it all seemed fine. The lights kept not working, though. Then I had a thought. The next time it happened, instead of changing the light bulb, I just tightened it. And just like that, it turned back on. The first time this happened, I was so surprised I nearly fell off the chair I was stood on. The bulbs hadn't been breaking. Someone had been unscrewing them. Not much, not enough that we could spot it, just enough for them to not work. I say someone had been doing this. There was only one person it could have been. For some reason, Natalie had been unscrewing all the light bulbs in the flat every chance she got. That was also when Kathy started to look so tired. She kept nodding off when we went out for dinner and would often zone out if we were watching TV. I asked her about it, but she just brushed it off and said she hadn't been sleeping well.
I need to get the add-on
It wasn't until she got so tired she almost walked out in front of a car while she was crossing the road that I finally got her to tell me what was going on. She said that Natalie had started staying home at nights, but she was so loud that it stopped her sleeping. Natalie would wander through the living room and sing in a language Kathy didn't know, and the tune was so discordant that it set her teeth on edge. Natalie would stop singing if she came into the living room, but would then just move to her room and the song would start again. Kathy even said that when Natalie did leave, always at night, there would still be the sound of movement from her room. Shuffling, thumping noises, and occasionally the sound of something being knocked onto the floor. She'd come close to opening the door so often, but could never bring herself to do so. It seemed to be louder when she was trying to sleep. And once she thought it had moved into the living room, but she didn't go out to check. So no, Kathy wasn't getting much sleep. She started staying over with me a lot, as she said she just couldn't handle living alone with Natalie. One night, she arrived at my house almost in tears. I took her up to my room and sat her on the bed. She stared at me for a few seconds, and I was about to ask what was wrong when she started to speak. She said that Natalie had tried to convert her. She had come to Kathy's room earlier that night, knocked on the door, very polite. She'd seemed cheerier than she had since her mum's death, and asked if Kathy wanted to have some dinner and talk. Now, obviously Kathy had wanted to discuss moving out for months, but she'd never been in a fit state, so she jumped at the chance. The dining room was dark. Natalie must have unscrewed the light bulb again, because the switch did nothing. Thin slivers of moonlight coming through the curtains gave just enough light to see the table, and two bowls at either end. Natalie sat at one end and waved for Kathy to sit at the other. Kathy had wanted to run, but didn't know quite how to do so. She said it would have felt rude, so she sat down and tried to eat what Natalie had prepared. She thought it might have been spinach, but if so, it must have been boiled for far too long, and all that remained was a stringy, limp mush. It was stone cold. She could barely get through 2 forkfuls before she started to retch. It was so slimy. She pushed it away as gently as she could. She said Natalie just watched, not even glancing at her own bowl. Finally, Kathy managed to get the nerve to speak and told her she wanted to move out. There was silence for a long second. Then Natalie had said she did as well. I'll admit I sighed with relief when Kathy said that, but she shook her head and continued. Natalie had begun to speak, longer and in more detail than she had for a long time. She said that she needed to move out, that she had a new home to be going to, a new family. She said that they were all going, that 300 years was a long time to wait, but she was lucky to have found it so close to the end. She said that it wasn't long until they were collected by Mr. Pitch. She said that Kathy could come too if she liked. She could be saved. It was at this point Kathy realized Natalie was talking about her church. She became
so tired.
very scared and stood up, telling Natalie thanks, but she wasn't really one for Christian worship. And Natalie laughed at this. Laughed long and hard, never breaking eye contact. She had said, "No, but you're a natural for them. You're worshipping as we speak." It was at that point Kathy ran and came over to my house. Natalie hadn't tried to stop her. At this point, I was angry as all hell. If Natalie wanted to join some weird cult, and by that point we were both sure that's what it was, then that was her business. But she was scaring Kathy. There was no way I was going to let that stand. I told her that I was going over to her flat, was going to have it out with Natalie. I don't know what I was going to do. I mean, I wasn't going to hit her or anything. I just needed to make it clear that you couldn't just screw with people's lives like this. Kathy told me not to go, but she wasn't in any fit state to stop me. I got in the car and started to drive. It was an overcast night, and without the moon, the streets were dark. The lamps on the road seemed dull, and even my headlights didn't reach as far as I thought they should. It wasn't far to the small house. I didn't expect any lights to be on, but the silent darkness of the place still sent a shiver down my spine. I had a key to the door and let myself in. I'd taken a torch from my car, and sure enough, the lights weren't turning on. The hallway was silent, but my nerves were on edge, and I started to look through each room in turn. Nothing. There was no sign of Natalie at all. I stood there, in front of her room. It just had a normal wooden fire door, but my hand still hesitated as I reached to open it. I knew it was empty. By now I was sure she wasn't home. Still, I was starting to feel that fear that Kathy had described. I saw that my hand was shaking. I tried to ignore it, grit my teeth, and I opened the door. The room inside was empty, as I had thought. But it wasn't just that Natalie was out. It was completely bare. No furniture, no possessions, nothing. The carpet had been torn up, leaving the bare floorboards exposed, and the wallpaper had been stripped from the wall. All of it had been stuffed and nailed up against the room's only window, leaving it completely covered. No light from outside got through, and the torch was the only reason I could see at all. I started to look around for any clue to what Natalie had been doing or where she had been. In the corner, half slipped between the boards, I spotted a piece of paper. It was small and thick, and seemed to have something written on it. Picking it up, I saw it had 3 words on it. Hither green dissenters. The other side had a symbol of some kind written in thick marker pen. A curved line with 4 straight lines coming off one side of it, like a closed eye. I kept the paper, and your institute can have it if you want. It's not like the police were interested in it. I called Kathy to tell her what I'd found. She was worried about me, but also about Natalie. Whatever this weird church was that she'd joined, I think we both reckoned it might be bad for her. Really bad. Kathy wanted to phone the police, but I told her there just wasn't enough for it to be a crime. Not yet. I told her I'd keep looking. I might have lied, to be honest, and said I was just going to look around the house more, but, well, I did a search for Hither Green Dissenters, and it looked like there was an old abandoned chapel, the Hither Green Dissenters Chapel, in a graveyard near Lewisham. I had decided that I needed to check it out. No idea what I was hoping to find. Enough to call the police in, I guess. By now it was just past midnight, and the drive down wasn't too difficult. There was still that thickness to the night, a heavy gloom that deadened all light, like someone had turned the brightness down on London. I found a parking spot not too far away from Hither Green Cemetery, and started to walk towards it. The iron gates stood wide open, so I went in. The graveyard itself wasn't as bad as I'd feared. If anything, it felt quite peaceful. The darkness seemed right for it, and the stones stood silent and firm. I walked along the path until my light fell across a small building. The chapel. It was tiny, surrounded by temporary fencing that looked like it had been there long enough to become permanent. It had a single pointed bell tower, and the windows were covered with old boards that looked like they'd seen the worst of the rain. There was only a single entrance, a pair of double doors set at the front. To my surprise, they stood open. I called out Natalie's name, shouted, and asked if anyone was in there. But there was only silence. I shouldn't have gone in. Of course I shouldn't have gone in. I'm not that stupid. I've never been that stupid. But for some reason, standing there in that dark, empty cemetery, I made the decision to look inside. It was easy to squeeze past the barriers. I still had my torch with me, but it didn't shine very far in. I entered slowly, casting my light over everything, just in case there was some hooded cultist freaks waiting to jump me. But there were only old broken pews, discarded bottles and cigarette ends, the normal detritus any abandoned building collects. I was just about to turn around and leave when my torch died. Immediately, I was plunged into complete darkness. No light was coming in through the door. I couldn't even see where the door was. Everything around me was pitch black. I tried to get the torch to turn back on, turning the bulb and hitting it in a near panic. I tried to take the batteries out and put them back in, but I couldn't see anything, and I ended up fumbling and dropping them. I knelt down and tried to feel where they were, but the ground felt odd. I hadn't paid much attention to it when I first came in, but the floor had been chipped, dusty, and covered with a layer of junk. But when I started to feel around for the batteries, it felt smooth and clean and very cold, like marble or something. I called out for help, but my voice just echoed in the silence. And the singing started. It seemed like there were dozens of voices, but they didn't match together right. Some were singing really high, and others so low it made my teeth hurt. The words were in some other language, but I remember they kept coming together for the words Ni Alisand or Alicent, I think. I was freaking out, so I got to my feet and started to walk forward as fast as I was able, my hands stretched out in front of me in case I hit anything. The chapel couldn't have been more than 30 feet long, maybe 20 wide, but I walked for well over a minute without hitting anything. I just staggered through the complete darkness with that awful singing everywhere. At one point, I honestly thought I might have died and gone to hell. Finally, my fingers brushed against something. It was cold like the floor, but rough. It felt like rusted metal. Thin strips of rusted metal in a crisscross pattern, with small gaps between them. At least that's what it felt like. I didn't hold on to them for very long, because as my hands rested there, I felt fingers reach through the holes and try to grab me. I couldn't see them, but they felt leathery as they brushed against my skin. I screamed and leapt back, falling to the floor, and as I did so, I felt something hard jab me in the hip. It was my phone. In all that had happened, I'd forgotten I had it. I reached in and pressed the button, and the screen lit up, faint and barely visible, but I started crying like it was the first light I had seen in months. It didn't light up anything else, but as the singing began to crescendo, I desperately went to the torch function and turned it on. And it did turn on in a sudden flash of brilliance, and the singing stopped. In the silence, I shone the makeshift torch in front of me and saw a broken pew. The floor was once again covered in junk, and I could see the doorway behind me, leading out into the night. I ran, calling Kathy first and then the police. They didn't find anything, of course. They gave me a telling off about trespassing and took down a missing person report about Natalie. Nothing was found, and as far as I know, she's still gone. I didn't tell Kathy exactly what happened for a few weeks, but when I finally did, she made me come here and talk to you. I think that's everything. Can I go now? Statement ends. The last section, naturally, is the one that invites my skepticism, but let us disregard that for now and discuss the other aspects. Sasha has confirmed that Natalie Ennis was reported missing by Mr. Billum on March the 11th, 2015. There were no leads regarding her location beyond the piece of paper mentioned in the statement, and no traces of any church or cult was found within the Hither Green Dissenters Chapel or the graveyard surrounding it. When we contacted Mr. Billum and Ms. Harper to follow up, neither of them had heard from her in the intervening year, nor did they have anything to add to the statement. The symbol upon the piece of paper does indeed resemble a stylized closed eye. And there are enough other parallels to statement 00200312 to make me suspect, and a suspicion is all that it is at present, that the People's Church of the Divine Host may still be in existence. Also of note, the words Ni Alessund. I don't know for sure if Mr. Billum remembered them correctly, but Tim pointed out that Ni Alessund is actually a small town in Norway. In fact, except for research installations, it is the most northerly human settlement on Earth, located at a latitude of north 785530. It is a company town, owned and operated by Outer Bay, but what it has to do with Mr. Billum's account is anyone's guess, assuming it isn't all coincidence. That far north, during the winter, nights can last for a very long time. Martin found one other thing while combing through police reports for the Hither Green area. About a month after the statement was given, on May 15th, 2015, police were called out to once again investigate the chapel. Neighbors had apparently heard screams from inside just after 11 p.m., but when officers arrived, they found nothing to indicate any sort of incident or foul play. I'd be content enough to ignore this, if it wasn't for the fact that, according to the official file, May 15th, 2015, was the day Gertrude Robinson, my predecessor, passed away. End recording.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International License. Today's episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. It was produced by Alexander J. Newell, Mike LeBeau, and Murray Porter, and directed by Alexander J. Newell. To comment on episodes, make donations, and view links, images, videos, and show notes, visit rustyquill.com. Rate and review us on iTunes, visit us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter at The Rusty Quill, or email us at mail@rustyquill.com. Thanks for listening. Rusty Quill presents the Magnus Archives. Episode 26, A Distortion.
Are you sure you're all right to do this now? You can take a few days off to recover if you need.
No, it's fine. Tim's getting me a coffee, and I'd rather get this down while it's still fresh in my mind. Besides, you didn't give Martin any time off when he had a bad experience.
Martin had to start living in the archives. I mean, I could hardly give him a holiday in the office. Anyway, he wasn't injured.
It's just a scratch, John. I'll be fine. Can we begin?
Okay. Statement of Sasha James, Assistant Archivist at the Magnus Institute, London, regarding...
Let's just call it a series of paranormal sightings.
Statement recorded direct from subject, 2nd of April, 2016.
Right. Well, I'm sure you know, I was sceptical about how dangerous this Jane Prentice was when you first suggested Martin stay in the archives. I mean, it's not that I didn't believe him about what happened, it just seemed... Well, Martin is a great researcher, but his self-preservation instincts are not the strongest. And to be frank, I thought that if this Prentice were a danger everyone seemed to think, then he'd almost certainly be dead. Don't get me wrong, I mean, I've read the same statements and profiles as you, so I know how many people have died because of her. What was it, 6 hospital staff when she was first admitted?
6 from colonization and a 7th with a broken neck from her escape.
But that was 2 years ago, and whatever she is now, it sounds like her condition is degenerating. I just wasn't sure how much damage she'd still be capable of. So I guess I didn't take as much care as I should have when I was coming into the Institute yesterday. The thing is, I'm still not sure how much of a threat she is. I've seen plenty of those silver worm things squirming about outside, same as you, and I made a point to step on them every time. What happened just made things more complicated, I guess. I'm not really sure what to think. I'll start with the first thing I noticed. I live up near Finsbury Park, and my building is old, Victorian I think, and though it's been repaired and maintained quite well, it's got all sorts of strange little quirks. One of these is the windows. The actual windows in the flats are fine, but the stairwell, they have slightly warped glass, where the windows have those little bubbles. Looking down on the street below can be a bit strange as the glass bends the light and distorts whatever's below it. I never really paid much attention to it until a few days ago, but it's not a new thing. It was the day before yesterday when I first saw it. When I'm heading down the stairs in the morning, I sometimes like to spend a few seconds looking out of the window at the people on the street below. I'll move my head so that I see them through the warped glass, and they'll distort like a funhouse mirror. It's a bit daft, but I have a pretty dreary commute down to Victoria, so I take my fun where I can get it. Well, on that morning, I paused before the window and noticed one of the warped figures below was off, slightly. It looked too tall. The limbs and body were very thin and almost wavy, like they didn't have any structure or bones in them. I couldn't make out a face, but it was the hands that were most bizarre. They seemed to be stretched and inflated by the distorted light until they were almost the size of the rest of the torso. Their fingers were long and stiff and seemed to end in sharp points. It stood completely motionless, and I could feel it staring at me. Moving my head to the side, I saw that the actual person I had been looking at was a large man with long blonde hair. He was neither stood still nor facing me. instead moving around the display of the flower shop opposite my building. Nothing about the guy seemed especially out of place, but I made a mental note to keep a lookout for him. I checked again through the bubble of the bended glass, and again I saw that tall figure with its limp arms and huge hands. Now, you know me, John. I'm not exactly the bravest person in the world. I generally avoid horror, and I tend to stay off roller coasters in the rare situation I have a chance to ride them. So I was surprised as anyone that this undeniably sinister figure wasn't causing me more distress. I mean, I was a bit nervous, sure. I've never had any direct experience with the supernatural before, and the more I looked and checked and double-checked, the more sure I was that supernatural was exactly what it was. To be honest, I was surprised how quickly I accepted that. I've always considered myself a bit of a skeptic, and until recently, I'd have said working at the Institute only made me more so. Anyway, I watched it for about 10 minutes, until the blonde man brought a small bunch of lilies and walked away. Once he was gone, the distorted figure with the long hands disappeared as well. I headed down into the street and over to the flower shop. The woman working there gave me a bit of a confused look when I asked if there had just been a tall blonde man in her shop. She said yes, there had, and no, she hadn't noticed anything strange. And was I looking to buy some flowers? I was quite confused myself, and on a bit of an edge when I left. I was already late for work though, so I decided to ignore it and just keep an eye out. Sure enough, it wasn't too long before I saw him again. There's a small cafe I generally pop into when I head to work in the morning. I love the Institute's building, of course, it's beautiful, but from a money point of view, I really wish it wasn't in Chelsea. Everything around here is so expensive. I generally walk down from Victoria Station. It's a long walk, but quite pretty, and it gives me a chance to pick up a coffee on the way. As I said, I was running late that morning, so I was a bit conflicted about whether to get one, but as I looked in the window, I saw a familiar figure at one of the corner tables. Again, the blonde guy wasn't looking in my direction, nor did he seem to give any indication that he was aware of my existence. He was there, though, and I was on the verge of walking in and confronting him when I noticed the time and decided getting to work was more important. Besides, what's that old saying? Once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, 3 times is enemy action. I decided that if he turned up a 3rd time, then I would ask him something. I don't really know what I was planning to ask him. Are you secretly a monster? Probably would have been a great opener. When I got here, I realized I needn't have worried so much about the time. You were having some argument with Tim about, who's that architect he's obsessed with?
Robert Smirk.
Yeah, that's the one. So I was starting to regret not getting a coffee and talking to tall, blonde and monster, since it didn't seem like I'd have missed much. I got on with my work, did some filing, cross-checked a few statements with police incident reports. I mean, I guess I don't need to tell you what a day working the archives entails. It was a quiet day, aside from when Martin thought he saw one of those silver worms and we spent half an hour checking for it.
Yes, I remember.
Come on, it's not his fault he's being stalked by some weird living hive.
I know. But it would have to have been Martin, wouldn't it? I mean, anything goes wrong around here, it always seems to happen to him. Anyway, we're getting off topic. Why didn't you report this?
Seriously? If a member of the public came in, you would have torn that statement to shreds. No, I figured I'd get more evidence, or it wasn't worth mentioning. Nothing else had happened until I left work. It must have been about 6:30, so the sun was just about starting to go down, and I headed back up towards Victoria. The first thing I noticed out of the ordinary was that the cafe was still open. Normally they shut up about 6 o'clock, but the lights were on and the door was open. I couldn't see anyone behind the counter though, and there was only one customer. He sat there in the exact same position he'd been in that morning, drinking what could easily have been the exact same coffee. I looked around to see if there was anyone else who could confirm what I was seeing. The street was empty, but as I looked, a car drove past. In the curving glass of its tinted windows, I saw him there, the weird, distorted body, rail thin and limp, the hands huge and sharp. And then the car passed on, and I turned back to see a normal-looking man. But now, for the first time, he was looking at me. He gestured to the chair across from him, clearly inviting me inside. I don't know why I wasn't more scared going in there, but I wasn't. My curiosity apparently conquered my nervousness. He didn't speak when I sat down, and I saw his coffee cup was empty. Whatever was inside had dried up hours ago. He seemed to be waiting for me to ask him a question. So I asked him what he was. He laughed at this, the first sound I'd heard him make, and it sounded unnatural, like he was laughing very quietly, but someone had turned up the volume so I could hear it. He said it didn't matter what he was, that he couldn't describe it even if he wanted to. What was the phrase he used? How would a melody describe itself when asked? This put my back up a bit, to be honest, and I told him if he was going to talk in cheap riddles, I was just going to leave. He actually apologized. Told me I could call him Michael. I didn't want to call him Michael. It didn't seem to fit somehow, and the way he said it made me think that it definitely was not his name. Still, it wasn't like I had any other name for him. No, not for him. For it. It sat there, clearly waiting for me to ask another question, so I did. I asked it what it wanted and was told that it wanted to help.
Help? With what?
That's what I said. Did it want to stop Jane Prentice? It laughed that weird laugh again and told me that I had no idea what was really going on. It didn't sound like it had any intention of telling me, though. It just seemed like it was amused by my attempts to understand. Then it said it didn't care if I or my companions lived or died, but that the flesh hive was always rash. It said it wanted to be friends. When it said that, it put its hand in mine, and it may have looked like a human hand, but it was heavy. It felt like a wet leather bag full of heavy stones, sharp stones. I pulled my hand away quickly and got up to leave. By this point, I was just about sick of this weird thing that looked like a person, but was not a person, and talked in riddles. It made no move to stop me as I headed towards the door. As I was about to exit, though, it called after me and said if I was interested in saving your life, it would be waiting at Hamwell Cemetery.
Sorry, saving my life?
Yeah, it called you by name. You and Martin and Tim.
That's unsettling.
It really was. At the time, I just tried to ignore it. I went home and I got as much sleep as I could. I don't know if you noticed how tired I was yesterday, what with Tim's April Fool's joke and everything.
Don't remind me.
Well, I was a bit of a mess. I checked the cafe on the way in and on the way home. I even went down there on my lunch, but Michael wasn't there. Part of me wanted to tell you about it immediately, to make a statement, but even if you believe me, I knew you'd try and talk me out of going to Hamwell Cemetery, and I just about made my mind up to go. I didn't know if what Michael had said was a threat or a warning or just a lie.
Oh my God.
But I decided I couldn't take the chance, so I went to the cemetery. The sun was starting to go down when I got there, and the gates of the graveyard were lit with a bright orange of the dying light. It had been raining earlier that day, and the pools of water reflected the vivid colours of the sky. Hanwell is an old cemetery, and past the walls I could see the weathered old gravestones standing silent. As it turned out, I didn't have to go inside. Michael was waiting for me next to the tall iron gates when I arrived. I caught a glimpse of its reflection in one of the deep pools of rainwater, and shuddered as I saw it again. The warped body and swollen, bony hands. It didn't say anything when I arrived, just nodded at me to follow. I have no idea how long it stood there waiting for me. I expected to go into the graveyard, but instead, Michael started walking down the road towards a nearby row of houses. The sign on the road said, Azalea Close. Most of the buildings were in good repair, but there was one at the end that looked abandoned.
Jesus
It might
Christ.
have been a pub at one point, but now all the windows were boarded with metal sheets and covered with dirt and graffiti. The door, however, was open and swinging gently. Michael went inside, clearly expecting me to follow, so I did. Inside was dark and dusty. I was annoyed with myself that I hadn't thought to bring a torch, but just enough of the setting sun came through the door for me to see by. It clearly had once been a pub, and the bar appeared to be intact, though riddled with woodworm. Sitting on top of it was what looked like a builder's kit with a toolbox and a small fire extinguisher. I was just about to ask Michael why we were here when I heard it. A low, wet groan coming from the far end of the room where the light didn't reach. It sounded like someone in a great deal of pain. I walked towards the noise. As I got closer, my eyes began to adjust, and I saw the floor was covered in pale, writhing shapes. I had to listen to Martin's statement after he recorded it, so I knew what to expect. But hearing about something doesn't even come close to seeing it, to smelling it. I expected to see what Martin described, a squirming mass that was once Jane Prentice, but the figure slumped against the wall looked like it was once a man. The worms wriggled in and out through the holes in his skin. The flesh hive, Michael had called it, and the silver things formed clustered knots where his eyes used to be. I couldn't help it. I gasped. It wasn't a loud sound, and given how sick the whole situation made me feel, I think I actually was quite composed. It was loud enough, though. The head snapped around to face me, dislodging a small cascade of twisting shapes. The mouth opened as he tried to scream, but that wasn't what came out of his mouth. The worms also seemed to have taken notice and began to move towards me at an alarming speed. I backed away, but slipped on a piece of loose wood and fell into the bar. I glanced desperately at Michael, but it just watched me, its face unreadable. I started to try and stamp on the worms as they approached, but there was just too many of them. Staggering to my feet, I felt my hand come to rest on something cold and metal, the fire extinguisher. Without thinking, I pulled the pin out and squeezed the handle. A cloud of gas shot out, and to my surprise, the silver worms began to shudder and recoil, shriveling and dying. I began to walk forward, catching every last one in the jet of gas. Finally, I found myself standing over the mass of pitted and hollow skin that was once a man. He shuddered violently as the gas engulfed him, and then lay still. I was breathing heavily, and the CO2 from the fire extinguisher was making me feel lightheaded. For some reason, I felt like I should check his pockets. They were empty except for a wallet. It was stained with blood and other substances, but the name on the driver's license was still readable. Timothy Hodge. As I stood there, staring at the wallet, I felt a sharp pain in my right arm. I looked up to see Michael reaching into my shoulder. Its fingers were long and distorted as they reached through my skin, cutting it like paper. I screamed. After a few seconds, it withdrew its hand. Held there was a single silver worm, wriggling pathetically in its grip. I hadn't even felt the thing burrowing into my arm. After that, it's all a bit of a blur. I remember I was going to phone the police, but Timothy Hodge's corpse was gone, and I was worried about trespassing, so I just sort of wandered away. Michael, or whatever it was, had gone as well. Eventually, I found my way back to the Institute where I must have woken up Martin and, well, here we are.
Yes, I suppose we are.
So, what do you think?
I don't really know. We can look into it more later.
I should really quit, you know. We all should. I don't think this is a normal job. I don't think this is a safe job.
You're probably right. Do you want to quit?
No. I'm just too damn curious, I suppose. You?
No. Whatever's going on, I need to know. Get some rest. Statement ends. Obviously, there is little we can really do to follow up Sasha's experience. If it was any of the others, I might have cause to doubt, but she has always been the most level-headed of the team. And if she says that this is what happened, then I believe her. This does at least explain what happened to Timothy Hodge, whose disappearance shortly after making his statement in late 2014 has been something of a concern since I discovered it. It seems odd how different the effect of Prentice's infestation was on him and Harriet Lee, but without more information, I don't have a working theory on why that might have been. The thing that most disquiets me about Sasha's statement is this Michael. She seems pretty convinced that he was not human, at least not in the conventional sense. Almost every statement I've catalogued has engaged with the paranormal in some form of antagonistic relationship. The idea that there are things out there like that that want to help us. For some reason, that makes me more uncomfortable than the worm-infested creature stalking the Institute. Sasha has taken a few days off to recuperate, and I'm having a word with Elias about getting some extra CO2 fire extinguishers for the archive. Recording ends.
The Magnus Archives is a podcast distributed by rustyquill.com and licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share-alike International license.
Because I'm
Today's
dying.
episode was written and performed by Jonathan Sims. It was produced by Alexander J. Newell, Mike LeBeau, and Murray Porter, and directed by Alexander J. Newell. To comment on episodes, make donations, and view links, images, videos, and show notes, visit rustyquill.com. Rate and review us on iTunes, visit us on Facebook, tweet us on Twitter.
I like how there are boars without ribs, so that's fun. Like the zebras without hooves and stuff like that. Oof. Come on, one rib. Just one rib. Come on, you must have ribs. Fucking rib. Okay.
Great to meet you. Talk to me. Off with it. How are you? Be good. Pleased to meet you. Off and away.
I guess everybody's joining that guild. Oh.
How are you? Safe travels. Hello. See you soon.
Okay, I'm gonna log out for now because oh, I'm so tired. And I need to go shopping because the shop closes in like 30 minutes. So thanks for watching, and I should be back a little bit later. Bye bye.